Hello, everyone. Some familiar faces here today. So glad to be talking here today at Porto Tech Hub. And before I start, I would like to say that this presentation is almost a round table, so feel free to give your 2 cents after the presentation, okay? So, who am I? My name is Luis. I'm a senior software engineer at Liminal with focus on the front end, but I'm also the co-founder and organizer of Frontend Oppo, and that's why I'm here talking on the community track. If you haven't checked our desk yet, please do it after lunch to get your sticker and know more about our community. So, I was wondering how many people wouldn't... It doesn't change the slide. Okay, some lagging. I was wondering how many people would understand the reference on the talk title. It's a reference from this book, Capitalist Realism, where the author discussed that we live in a time in the society where capitalism is the final and the only economic system. And in his words, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Through this realism idea, I'm trying to bring it to the front-end world. Today we're going to discuss that something that looks like the last and only choice is completely different than the best option or the most optimal alternative. And for today, React is the last framework. This is a fact. There's no discussion that today React is highly adopted. The framework and the community are very mature. And why did this happen? Because React ecosystem is very mature and very huge. For everything you want to do, we have like 2 or 3 very good alternatives. For example, if you want server-side rendering, we have Next, Remix, now React Router, 10-stack Start, and so on. For styling, for testing, for routing, for global state management, we have a lot of alternatives with a huge community and a lot of good contributors behind them. If you're looking for a job, React is a great path. If you search for React jobs on LinkedIn, you will notice that it has a lot of results. And if you do the same for other frameworks, you will see that we have like half of the results, and some of them are React results, even if you're searching for Vue or Angular, for example. This kind of situation makes new developers to adopt React as their path. And also, new companies and projects will start their apps in React to have a more pool of available devs. That's how the wheel continues to spin. Back in the time, also, when AI wasn't in our daily activities, if you have a problem, a question, or whatever related to React, it's very easy to find Stack Overflow questions, videos, articles, or whatever about React or your question in React. This is what we used to call the two Google searches away culture. And now, with AI, it's very easy to see that AI is very good at React if you compare with the other frameworks. The same happens with Python because the AI models were trained in a vast of React content. But of course, React is not perfect. Nothing's perfect, and I think React quite far from it. A major problem that we have in React is the use effect hook. In my opinion, it was bad designed by the React team, and because of that, a lot of developers misunderstood how to use it, and more importantly, when not to use it. The function does a lot of things for example, control the life cycle of the component and trigger functions when some state changes. The problem is so big that the React team adds a section on their documentation to help the devs with the misplaced use effects on their code. But please, don't blame the devs. The default behavior of it's an infinite loop, right? One example of how use effect is a problem in a real-world application is the outage of Cloudflare in the mid-September of this year. The Cloudflare services, this outage happens due to misuse of a use effect hook. A simple object trigger infinite calls to the Cloudflare bring their services down. So, sorry, an object inside the dependence array of the use effect trigger an infinite call to a Cloudflare API, and then it brought the services down. And what about page performance? Please, hold a second, I want water. When we talk about performance in frontend, a lot of people brings the idea to apply server-side rendering in our client-side applications. And this could be good. It actually improves the time for the first byte, but I believe some people forget about the interaction after the page renders. And why hydration can become a bottleneck if you have a lot of components, states, and event triggering in your page or React component. Because how React is in the core, React needs to, in every interaction, React needs to run everything on the virtual DOM before it updates in the actual DOM. So, in other words, the first render feels great, but clicks and typing don't respond immediately because React has to run on the main thread before the app feels responsive. Last but not least, let's back when I mentioned that React has a great ecosystem, and I love to say that everything that is good has also a downside. And in the huge ecosystem in React feels like for everything you want to do in a React application, you have to make a decision. Should I use a framework? Which bundler? Which state management library? And so on and so forth. And this can cause what we call the choice overload. And on top of that, we also always fuse a FOMO in the React world because every single day it appears a better and a newer framework. Sometimes, because of all that I mentioned and in other problems, coding React feels like this. So, what about other alternatives? Is Vue a better option? If you're seeking for simplicity, it could be. Thanks to the Vue composition API, in Vue, it's easier to define states and change them inside your component. For example, instead you create a state and a use effect and use a use memo to create memoized variables. In Vue, you can use the ref to create your variables and assign new values to them, just like you're assigning a new value to a normal JS variable. And also, the lifecycle hooks are more explicit and descriptive than the React one, that is the use effect. This helps us to understand very well how is the Vue lifecycle flow and when the code that you're putting inside a function, it runs. And of course, it's impossible to not talk about Svelte. Svelte made our websites pragmatic with almost no effort. Here, it's an example of a heavy API search with debounds, state changes, and state controls with no use effect, no use memo or callback. That's why Svelte compiler ensures fine-grained and efficient updates, because Svelte doesn't use a virtual DOM. It compiles your component into small and direct DOM operations. Of course, that we have a lot of other alternatives to build UIs and web pages, for example, Solid, Quick, and this new one, Ripple. So if you want to know more about how the component works, how a framework does something, if you want to compare all the frameworks and different versions, I highly recommend this website, component-party.dev. I will not show them because we have a technical issue, but it's very fun. And let's talk a little about the hole that we are jumping nowadays because of AI. The AI lock-in isn't a vendor locking like AWS or Apple. It's a data locking. Because React dominates the repositories, tutorials, articles, and videos, the models learn React as the street layout, the street standard. In some cases, when you are coding into a framework that looks like React, or it has a feature that looks like React, it often answers in React anyway. Quantity in AI always beats quality, so it's very common to receive a response from the AI that is not the best way of doing something, but the most common way, or the way that we used to do when the AI was trained. This caused that the default path for juniors and also AI-assisted coders or vibe coders becomes React, regardless of whether it's the best for the job. So what does that mean in practice? Yeah. What? Okay, so what does that mean in practice? What are the consequences for our lives? We are all developers, right? So I believe that new implementations will be harder due to the old training data. Syntax level innovations will be risky, right? Because the more we use AI for coding, the less we will have bigger changes on language or frameworks like the Vue 2 to Vue 3 migration. And also, it will be easy to have a net effect. The combination of React feels good enough, and the convenience of using AI to generate code lends us towards to inertia. So I believe it's totally fair to worry about the future, how the things will be in the front-end world and in the programming world. We all do. Some questions appear like, is it the end of innovation? Will AI lock us forever? Of course, that we all have been overwhelmed. I don't want to be trapped in a hole, and I think nobody wants. But I believe we can also have a glass half full perspective on this. The innovation won't vanish. It will migrate to other spaces. For example, in the keyboard layout war, different layouts could be better. They actually exist, but everyone already has their query muscle memory, and it's quite impossible to convince the people to migrate to a different layout. So the innovation migrated from the layout to the structure. Let the keys be easier and more comfortable to type than instead of changing their positions. The same was applied by the React core team with the new React compiler. They improved the memoization pane, the performance in React, without any changing in syntax. And of course, if I don't have time to talk about it. So if you want to know more about the React compiler and how it works, how its internals, I highly recommend this talk from Lydia in this year React Summit. Very good talk. And also, frameworks can also adapt to AI, creating guidance, changing tooling, and creating new conventions for it, making their adoption easier not only for new developers, but also to AI. For example, ShadCN, that is a component library, creates a MCP server to help AI to generate their components and to understand better how the ShadCN design system library works. And also, BUN, that is a new technology, some technology that wants to face Node.js in the JS battle, changes the response of their documentation from HTML to Markdown when AI models call it. So frameworks need to adopt that as well. Now, I believe that React actually is a strong default, but we need to think that it's not mandatory. When you want to create a new project, a new app, or refactor something that exists, you need to define your constraints. Pick the two that minimize total costs. This is very important. Thinking on maintainability, hiring, shape your stack. So compilers, runtimers, frameworks, and AI will work for you. Default is completely different from Destiny. Choose by your requirements, not hype. And that's it, guys. Thank you. Before I open for questions or for lunch, I was planning this talk since, I believe, June or even May. And like 2 weeks ago, Lauren Stewart released, I noticed actually that Lauren Stewart released this article, and it's very good. And he hates React more than me, and I don't hate React, but I don't know if you think this, but it's very, very good. I highly recommend if you want to check this out. It's more detailed and it has different impressions on this subject of how React is dominating in the front-end battle. And I also want to thank Theo for this video because it inspired me a lot to talk about that and to say how we can shift the technologies and how we need to pay attention on how AI has been trained. So it's also a very good video. And someone has questions? Can we lunch? So, okay. Thank you guys for your attention. Have a good conference and check Frontend Oppo booth after the lunch, please. Thank you.